Sometimes you have no influence on the people in power. What you might do is influence people out of power. I used to say that you're often looking not at the current administration, but maybe the next one or the one after that. You're trafficking in ideas. Often they're ignored, often they're disagreed with. Sometimes people run with them. Something doesn't add up. All these people who for years were saying there's something there. Clearly there was a lot of smoke, so I assume there was considerable fire. And this was a kind of rallying cry for the MAGA right, that there was somehow a cover-up. And suddenly this administration is now in a position to have access to everything we know.
Way of Will John.
What's happening, people? Today we have Dr. Richard Haass, and you have done quite a number of things, and you have a list of things that you have accomplished in your life. So I'm going to kick it over to you to kind of give a version of the intro to the public and let everybody know what you're about.
Well, first of all, good to be with you. Look, what I'm about, I spent most of my life, probably the last 50 years, working loosely in what you might call foreign policy, either as an academic, studying international relations, at various think tanks. I was president of the Council on Foreign Relations for 20 years, writing all sorts of books and hundreds of articles at these think tanks. I worked on the Hill for a while for a Democratic senator before you were born, almost before I was born. It was so long ago. I worked in the Carter Pentagon. I worked in the Reagan State Department. At the White House for George Bush the father. I was the Middle East advisor there during the Gulf War for those 4 years. And then my last government stint was with Bush 43, with George W. Bush, and I ran the policy planning staff at the State Department. So that's been my life. It's something you can only do in the United States, really. It's a kind of in and out existence, in and out of government. And again, when I was on the outside, either at think tanks or teaching at various universities. Now I'm based at a investment bank, but I still spend a really good chunk of my time writing and thinking about and speaking about international subjects. And one other thing, my last book was a book called The Bill of Obligations. I also increasingly focus on American democracy and the teaching of civics. And what do we have to do to make sure that young people appreciate the value of democracy and what it both gives you, the rights, but also the obligations that come with it. So I'm spending a lot of I'm carving out time to do that.
So one of the things that I try to do with the show here, and one of the goals is to try to get a good understanding of not just the nature of our government and governments, let's say world governments, but also the nature of reality and things like this. And obviously, and I don't think there'd be anybody more qualified to answer a question like this. One of the massive buzzwords over the course of the last, let's say 5, almost 8 years has been the deep state. All right. And as a guy who has worked for several presidents and within different places, can you help us get an understanding of A, why is this so important now? And B, what is your relationship to what is a deep state? Does it exist in this form? Can they truly manipulate the world in any ways? Or give us an understanding of what you think, having been an insider to this.
So let me just put it out there. On my short list of terms that I really detest, deep state is somewhere near the top of it. Look, deep state is government. Tens of millions of Americans work in government around the world. Probably hundreds of millions of people work in government. And government has the potential to make our lives a lot better or a lot worse, depending upon how competent, how honest it is. To call it the deep state is clearly to disparage it because it suggests it has an agenda that is somehow at odds with what's good for most people. It's not my experience at all. I mean, government is not always highly competent. I get it. It has a range of talents or lack of talents. There are people who probably have political or ideological agendas. By and large, in my experience, people in government are kind of like people everywhere else, work pretty hard at what they do, believe in their mission. And we want to, one of the many reasons I hate the phrase is we want to encourage the best and brightest to go into government. Again, government matters. It makes a difference. So why should we so disparage it that talented people, to borrow from LeBron, will take their talents elsewhere? We want talented people to go into government, and we want talented people to stay there. They've got the history. They've got the perspective. They've seen certain things before. So to suggest that people in government, again, have this agenda that's, again, bad for the people of the country, the citizens of the country, it's just not reality based. And what we're doing, in part because of that mentality, in part because of Doge, is we're discouraging people from coming into government, and we're encouraging people or forcing them to leave government. And we're all going to pay an enormous price for this. So, I could go on, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. This is a really destructive idea that is not reality-based.
𝗪𝗪𝗡, the elite private membership club for the modern mystic, exploring powerful teachings on spirituality, self-awareness, ancient wisdom, a deep dive into meditation, mindfulness, and transformational practices designed for those ready to lead their own journey. Are you ready to step up?
See, and that's interesting the way that you describe it, especially considering that or necessarily referring to the people that are within government. It's my understanding, obviously never having served in any form of a government in the government position, that the people who are claiming the deep state is a thing is because of influence of people outside of government manipulating things within the government. I mean, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is their claim within the deep state. Now, I don't know whether or not that's possible. We always have to have, we all as humans have influences, but I think that is the claim rather than the people within government. I'm not sure, just to clarify, I don't want to misrepresent the idea of a deep state from within, but.
Well, like people in government are influenced like people anywhere else. They might be influenced by the sermon they've heard in church. They might be influenced by the show they've seen on television. They might be influenced by what they've read on social media or the podcast they listen to walking to work, whatever. Obviously, people in government, like people out of government, are vulnerable or open to being influenced. They have the right to vote. So they have political preferences, even agendas at times. Okay. What we want in government, though, is we want competent people who can put some of their personal preferences aside. And we also want to have the process sufficiently transparent. So if they're not doing what they should, or if they're not doing it the way they should, they get stopped. So again, I'm sort of at a loss to deal with the deep state issue. Let me say one other thing about the United States. Every president gets the right to appoint approximately 4,000 people. And these are people who are at the cabinet and sub-cabinet and sub-cabinet level. And this is a layer of political appointees. And then below that, you have literally millions of people at the federal level working in the government. This is the career. In many cases, this is their career. They spend 20, 30, 40 years working there. Like a foreign service officer might spend 30 or 40 years. Most never get to the rank of ambassador. And they spend 3 years at each post, some overseas, some at home. Or intelligence professionals spend 30 or 40 years. Military spend however many, 20 years, or some cases longer. Again, that's the way it works. If you want to call them the deep state, seems to me it's doing them a real injustice. And at the end of the day, it hurts the people using the phrase are hurting themselves because, again, it discourages talented people from serving in government.
Mm-hmm. What is it like within these think tanks in general? I mean, because obviously being an advisor doesn't mean that the policies and the things that you come up with, the solutions you maybe come up with, have to be followed by any means. I would imagine people are instructed to decide what they want to do. Are there cases in which you have been a part of a think tank or with your work with the Council on Foreign Relations, you guys have come up with a solution, it's gone against either a sitting president or someone has gone against that, and you guys just have to sit there and say, well, we told you that was a bad idea and you did it anyway. How does that work?
Happens all the time. It's useful almost to think here or to distinguish between power and influence. When you're in a think tank, you have zero power. What you have is potential influence. You're trafficking in ideas. So the idea may be something you say on television, something you say in a podcast, a book you write, an article you write, a tweet you put out, whatever. Might be a meeting you have with a senator, a congressman, an official, what have you. So you're in the business, again, of producing and disseminating ideas. Often they're ignored. Often they're disagreed with. Sometimes people run with them or run with them in part. Sometimes you have no influence on the people in power. What you might do, if you think, is influence people out of power. I used to say when I worked in think tanks or ran one, that you're often looking not at the current administration, but maybe the next one or the one after that. You're trying to influence younger people who have more time to read your stuff. And then when they come into positions of power and authority, they have been influenced by your stuff. Like when you're in government, you're so busy. In my experience, just keeping up with your inbox, you don't have an awful lot of time to read, long studies coming out of a think tank. Sometimes an op-ed in the paper might just catch somebody, or might be a conversation. But look, at the end of the day, if you think about it, what drives history? What drives politics? In my experience, it's people and ideas. Now, some might add money to that, but let's put that aside. But people, not a lot's inevitable. If different people are in positions of authority, different policies are going to come of it. And ideas, these people are going to be influenced by what they've experienced, what they've read, what they hear. So if you're in the think tank world, I think you're a believer that ideas matter and that potentially people are open to influence. But it doesn't always work out that way. Often people in government are simply looking for stuff that confirms their prejudices. And also, I may say one other thing. When you speak of government or people in power, it might be that you strike out trying to influence the executive branch, but maybe you get a hit because you're influencing somebody in Congress, or maybe you're influencing some journalist or columnist who's writing. So there's lots, or some businessman. There's different target audiences besides people in the executive branch.
How does a think tank, or how would, I'll restrict it to the Council on Foreign Relations, since we're headed towards getting an understanding of all the different wars and conflicts on Earth. How do you guys then come up with a consensus on what needs to be influenced, right? I mean, if there's two of us here and one of us wants to head towards Australia and the other one wants to go towards Antarctica, what ends up being the way that the policy then can go? Because if it does and is successful, it can then influence someone in a way. How does that work?
Okay, well, I no longer run the Council on Foreign Relations, so I'll just sort of speak about it generally. I'm now the president emeritus. But look, when I ran the council, and it's still true now, the Council on Foreign Relations is an organization, but it doesn't take institutional positions. So the Council on Foreign Relations doesn't advocate for X or oppose Y. So what you have are lots of different people working there. Probably, 60, 70, I don't know the current number of fellows writing articles and books. And each one writes what he or she thinks is right. I used to say my job was quality control, but not editorial control. And we would often put out stuff that I disagreed with. Didn't matter. That wasn't I wasn't there as the House censor. I just wanted to make sure that whatever we put out was quality work. The Council on Foreign Relations publishes Foreign Affairs magazine. It's the leading magazine in the world about the world. Again, you've got authors of every persuasion, shall we say, arguing for this or against that. And when you either edit a magazine or run an institution, and you're holding meetings or publishing articles, what have you, you just want to make sure that you're producing quality stuff, and you've got a range of voices, a diversity of voices on a range of topics, and you want to be smart. It seems to me at the end of the day, the best thing to do is simply to be smart, and good ideas people will pick them up and run with them, and bad ideas, whatever, will tend to get lost.
And that's got to be quite a bit. There's got to be quite a bit of complexity on the intricacies of, say, a conflict. For instance, now to make it more concrete, the Iran-Israel conflict that we have here. I would find, this is just me, I can imagine being in a position to have to make a decision on this, but the complexities of the Middle East, just in general. And I know did you say you served as the advisor to George Bush during
President Bush the father, 41. So for those 4 years, I was the senior Middle East person at his White House.
Right, which would entail you essentially advising him on what to do and what not to do as far as foreign policy, meaning literally like if we invade this country or if this bomb goes off or this, et cetera, literally that. Could you tell us anything about that time? What's that actually like? How are you also, do you get briefings from intelligence in order to have an understanding? How does that work?
Well, it works in a couple of ways. It's a great question. One is you come into the job, hopefully with a little bit of knowledge. I had, spent time traveling and living in the Middle East. I had gotten a degree on it. I had done my doctorate on international relations, worked on these issues in government. So when I got asked to do this job, it wasn't my first rodeo, if you will, excuse me, with the Middle East. And yes, you continue to read newspapers, you read the unclassified stuff, you read intelligence briefings. You have access to the cables coming in from our embassies, the reports of our diplomats and attachés. If you're smart when you're in the government, you still reach out to outsiders, to academic experts. I used to try to avoid getting too isolated. So that's what you often surround you. You have a couple of colleagues. I had a few colleagues who worked with me on the Middle East at the National Security Council, which is where we were. So in a sense, it's like anything else in life. You, as best you can, do your analysis, draw your conclusions, make your recommendations. It's, in that sense, it's like any other position in life. It's just the stakes are, shall we say, considerably higher.
And given that you have had such a storied history with the Middle East, then how do you see things now? Do you feel that we have improved on things since that time? And do you see a brighter future, or have we messed it all up?
That's, again, a good question. There's some things I feel better about, and some things it's hard for me to give a single answer about the Middle East. I don't mean to be evasive, only because, look, as you know, it's so many different countries. There's so many different fault lines. There's so many sources of potential friction. So it's hard to give a single answer that sums it up. I mean, you've got, people don't even talk about it, but you've got, states that are barely succeeding. Taking Egypt, with about a quarter of the people in the Arab world, probably over 100 million people now. It's a rough existence providing for those people. Libya is in some ways still a quasi-failed state. Syria, you've got a new government trying to get control over the country. Yemen is still a deeply divided place. So you've got those kinds of countries that are just deeply, deeply troubled. Lebanon still doesn't have many of the attributes of a normal country. Then you have the small, successful, the states, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and a larger country, Saudi Arabia, that are blessed with enormous energy reserves, which are in a very different position. And then when the other parts of the Middle East, I think when most people think about the
Could you repeat that?
other people in the middle about the Middle East, they you have Iran, Israel, the Palestinian issues, and so forth. And that we can talk about. You asked about Iran. I think Iran, over the last year and a half, close to 2 years now, since October 7th, Iran is in a much diminished position. It's paid an enormous price for its support of various proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah. Hezbollah's been effectively decimated. Hamas has been dramatically weakened. We can talk about that more, because there's obviously been enormous cost to that process, human and other. You had the overthrow of the regime in Syria that Iran was so involved with and supportive of. And now you've had Iran in April and October of last year, and then more recently, its inability to defend its own airspace. It has been demonstrated 3 times by Israel and then by the United States. So Iranians have a lot of their nuclear program has been destroyed. A lot of their leadership, political, military leadership, as well as their nuclear establishment leaders have been killed. The Iranian economy is in a difficult way. The currency's lost a lot of its value. So I would say Iran is in a much diminished status over the last almost 2 years now. But to say it's diminished does not mean it's out. Iran still has considerable energy resources. It's a large, talented population. The regime has real tenacity, and I believe still likely has a hold on the levers of power. And I think there's real questions about whether Iran is able and willing to resurrect some of its proxies, and 2, whether it's able and willing to reconstitute its nuclear program. So in one of the words, you asked about my time at think tanks, one of the words I would never usually allow people to use is the word solution. Problems often don't get solved. It's not like they go into your outbox and you can forget about them. So I think the scale and nature of the Iranian challenge or problem has been dramatically changed and reduced, but it hasn't been eliminated. And so I think down the road, there's going to be, for the United States, Israel, and others, are going to have no choice but to revisit the question of what to do about or with Iran.
Mm-hmm. So then you, at this current time, would you say that it's less likely that U.S. continued involvement in Iran is likely in the near future?
I'd say the following. I think Iran is unlikely to do retaliation against the United States. If Iran were to retaliate against us, be a very different situation, but I don't think they are. I think the priority for this Iranian regime is to consolidate its power over the country. So I don't think they're looking for a war with the United States or even Israel at this point. So I think the United States can dial down its involvement with Iran in the near term, but not permanently. A lot will depend again upon whether Iran tries to reconstitute its nuclear program. If in 2 years, one day, we have reason to believe that in this warehouse or underground under a certain mountain, Iran is building or storing certain capabilities, enriched uranium, what have you, then the issue comes to the fore. And the question is, can it be resolved satisfactorily through diplomacy, or does military force again enter into the equation? And I would be surprised if this problem had, shall we say, disappeared. And I certainly wouldn't count on it.
One of the most interesting things I've found in trying to understand the whole geopolitical world is the notion of a proxy war and the prevalence of these over the last, 30, 40, 50, however long it's been clearly in the uprise, while major powers have utilized smaller nations and smaller places in order to carry out their fights. And so was there a time period, or is this an actual strategy? Meaning is someone right now, could someone advise a president or a nation to go carry out a proxy war because that would be more beneficial to us? Is that an actual strategy now? Meaning, can we avoid the Iran conflict or this conflict and go fight it somewhere else?
Well, again, proxy wars are an option for any powerful country if they don't want to do certain things themselves. So you could support a group or a country to do certain things, and it could be in reaction to what a great power rival is doing or a medium power rival is doing. It could be something you initiate. I mean, during the Cold War, there was all sorts of competition between the United States and the Soviet Union over those 4 decades. And at times it was done through third parties, some of which were states, some of which were not. And it was a way that either side would press for advantage without, though, doing it directly against the other. And that was the cushion, if you will, the proxy type or indirect competition gave you, because the concern during the Cold War was always if the U.S. and the Soviet Union ever got into things directly, it could too easily lead to a war, which could then escalate either into a massive conventional war or even a nuclear war. So the idea of structuring the competition through third parties was actually something of a pressure valve, since the United States and the Soviet Union obviously disagreed on so many things around the world. So more recently, we'll go back to Iran. Iran supported various groups in order to advance its foreign policy. And I think from the point of view of Iran, it was seen as a relatively cost-effective way to go around about a foreign policy. And Iran thought it could do so with a degree of impunity, that it could support these proxies who could promote its objectives, Hezbollah, Hamas, what have you, the Houthis. And Iran itself, because it would be almost one step removed, would spare itself some of the direct risks or costs. And I think what's happened over the last 2 years is that presumption on the part of Iran has been destroyed. And what the Iranians realized is, in particular, the Israelis were no longer willing to play that game, no longer willing to play the rules. And rather, I remember I used to once work for Al Haig when he was Secretary of State. He was Ronald Reagan's first Secretary of State in the early 80s. And Haig, in the context of Central America, saw Cuba in particular as the dangerous hand behind a lot of these left-wing movements, if you will, Cuban proxy wars, to use our conversation. And Haig at times would say, why are we just fighting the proxies with groups of our own? Why don't we go to the source? And if Cuba is the problem, and for various reasons we didn't at the time, but now I think what the Israelis have said is, okay, we're going to go to the source, and we're going to go to Iran. And I think that's what you've seen. And then, so again, I think it's an interesting question whether Iran tries to return to a proxy-led strategy or says that doesn't make sense anymore because the Israelis aren't willing to, if you will, play that game by the old rules. And I'd say one other thing, sorry to go on so long, Will, is that the weakening of Hezbollah really matters here, because Hezbollah was the one proxy that the Iranians counted on to deter Israeli attacks on Iran, because the feeling was Israel will never attack Iran because Hezbollah had thousands and thousands of missiles that could rain down on Israel. And when Israel essentially decapitated the leadership of Hezbollah and so weakened it that it could then act against Iran directly without fear of being attacked meaningfully itself, that really changed the equation in the Middle East. In some ways, it exposed the limits of Iran's proxy strategy.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, given that that's been the proxy wars have been the standard approach, let's say, for some time now, the last, 5-6 years, there's been this massive drum call for World War III. And that for some people saying that we're already in it, some people saying that it's coming. In your estimation, would World War III look anything like 1 and 2 with conventional war? Or is it possible that we could find ourselves entangled so much that World War III happens in a way that we just, sporadic wars all over the place and it just kind of gets out of control and then all of a sudden some powers drop? Or are we looking at this conventional crush down?
I only see 2 conceivable ways of thinking about a world war in the current period. And let me hasten to add, I'm not saying either's likely. One involves Russia. And imagine a scenario where Russia, for whatever set of reasons, either they're not doing well in its war against Ukraine or it's doing well in its war against Ukraine, decides to escalate against other European countries. And essentially then NATO invokes Article 5, the Collective Defense Agreement, responds against Russia. So that's one scenario. And that's exactly the sort of thing the United States and the Soviets tried to avoid during the Cold War and successfully avoided. So the question is whether Putin, who is a greater risk taker, I would say, than the Soviet leaders, and who has probably greater freedom than any Soviet leader had. Putin is so weakened the bureaucratic and institutional constraints on his decision-making, that I think there's actually probably more a risk of a confrontation with Russia than there was during most of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, put aside the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. So that's one scenario. That would be, Russia's largely a military power. Its conventional military has been exposed not to be very impressive. It's got mass, it's got quantity more than quality. The real danger there is very quickly it might escalate to nuclear weapons. So that's one nightmare scenario, which is the Putin aggression ambition scenario. The much more complicated one is the United States and China. And imagine a scenario where China either moves more aggressively in the South China Sea against, say, the Philippines, where you have competing claims on certain islands. We have a treaty commitment there. Or the bigger scenario, obviously, everybody talks about is Taiwan. And China uses, force against Taiwan one way or another. We respond. One thing leads to another. I can see that. It's not inconceivable. I'm not predicting it. But again, I can't sit here or stand here and rule it out. It's obviously a possibility. And the question is, if a war like that were to evolve, what would be the nature of the escalation? I don't think it would escalate to things nuclear, but geographically, what regional countries would be drawn in, the economic consequences for the region, the world would be incalculable. Trillions of dollars would be eliminated, of wealth would be eliminated overnight. All trade relations would be wildly disruptions. So I think, we're probably, but both of those, though, are probably different than the World War I, World War II scenarios. My guess is they're much shorter lived, more limited, more concentrated type things. But would still be destructive and costly by any and every measure. I'd say one other thing. We're at a really interesting moment. Now we're getting a little bit beyond my expertise here, but this is also kind of one of the reasons it's hard to answer your question. This is a transitional moment, I would argue, in warfare. You look at some of the Middle Eastern things between, say, Israel and Iran and Hezbollah, and then you look even more at Ukraine and Russia, and you see the emergence of drones. We've seen already the emergence over the years of anti-aircraft missiles, of anti-ship missiles. We're in an era where large numbers of high-quality, inexpensive systems can potentially overwhelm small numbers of high-quality but incredibly costly systems. And so the battlefield's changing. And I think the drone revolution in particular, and this still leaves out AI and what impact that might have. So one of the reasons it's hard to answer your question, it's quite possible we're going through a transformational or revolutionary moment because of the rate of technological change and the lessons learned from things like Ukraine, and then how militaries around the world incorporate those lessons in terms of the equipment they buy and how they use it, and so forth. So it's what worries me is I don't want people to feel that they don't have to worry about war. I want deterrence to still hold, because I'm not smart enough to know how wars would play out, other than to think they would be extraordinarily risky and costly in human and economic terms, not to mention political terms. So I'm hoping that we can get through this revolutionary period without having deterrence break down. If you think about it, we have now gone through 8 decades since the end of World War II, 8 decades without a great power war, which is a remarkable run of history. We got through the 4 decades of the Cold War without one. And ever since, even the war between Russia and Ukraine is an indirect war. The United States doesn't have boots on the ground, what have you. The United States and China haven't had a skirmish or a conflict. And so the question is, can we extend this? History would say, not easy, because it's been a remarkable run. And my guess is, what my fear is, that we may one day look back on this as a kind of golden age. If we look at the last 80 years, people would say, wow, we avoided great power conflict. The average lifespan is several decades longer. far more wealth in the world, whether overall or per capita. Far more people enjoy a degree of democracy. Our lives through technology and so forth are incomparably better. So you go, not bad as runs in history go. And I'm just enough of a pessimist at times that I just don't take that as its extension into the future as something that that we should bank on.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's obviously incredibly hard to imagine, especially for someone like me who's been born in that period, obviously, to think what it would be like to have a world war. I mean, someone who's growing up in 1914, and lives throughout the 1940s, kind of like, well, every once in a while, this just happens. This just pops off and we all just go crazy for a little bit. And but I want to take it back to something you said that I find really interesting, because you said one of the most effective ways of, let's say, change. I mean, I don't want to misquote you, but is essentially ideas and influence. And then you mentioned, obviously, at the end to just kind of, okay, we'll put money there to the side. But the way that on the outside, it seems, is that money does so much to influence everything, meaning that money is what's used to then influence ideas, right? And then those ideas then get incorporated into whether they're buying influencers, influencing media, movies, all these things. And so in my head, the way that I see it, yes, there's an interplay. While it costs nothing for me to start saying something about any country, one can be influenced through the use of money. Have you not found that money is a, let's say, a very effective means and strategy of, say, controlling or making change?
Absolutely. Money has real potential power and influence. But often it's almost a cycle. But that money often is being used to promote a set of policies based on a set of ideas. Money tends to gather around agendas that those with the money tend to like. And the reason I tend not to use the word controlling is often money triggers money working against it. So people who want to bring about one outcome in politics, big money, this political action committee or what have you, often stimulate a countervailing reaction. So my own view is so much is spent on both sides of most issues that it tends to cancel out. So, which is actually good news. That it stimulates the economy, and maybe it doesn't totally control our politics.
TheWayOfWillJohn.com, exclusive content and programs on manifestation, making money, hidden knowledge. Finally, reach your full potential.
And given that you've served for so long and so many different administrations and been around so much, one of the most topical points going on right now is the influence of U.S. on Israeli actions and Israel's influence on America right now. How do you see that question? Because it's one of the most prominent things right now.
So I would actually surprise you here, I'll predict, which is it's less in both directions than people think. And in one direction, it's less than I would like to see. Let's start with the United States on Israel. I actually think we could have more influence on Israel. Donald Trump is an extraordinarily popular man in Israel, in part because of what happened in Iran. Trump doesn't have to worry about the Israelis going to the Democrats in this country to, if they don't like what he's doing. So Trump has enormous leeway. And by the way, on quite a few issues, in terms of initially he said no to the Israelis when they wanted to attack Iran, on cutting a deal with the Houthis, on cutting a deal with Hamas. I could go down a list. It seems to me Donald Trump has been willing to do what he would see as in the U.S. interest, what he would call America first, even against the wishes of this Israeli prime minister. He's been publicly critical of him at times. Where I wish Donald Trump would be much more critical of this Israeli prime minister is over Israeli policy in Gaza and also Israeli policy in the West Bank, where the settlements are being increased at a rapid rate. They're being expanded. Violence is going on an almost daily basis. So I actually wish the United States would use, I would think, the influence it has. on Israel. And the president says he wants a deal in Gaza, he wants the hostages back. Okay, then press for it. And I actually think if he presses hard for it, it would be very hard even for Bibi Netanyahu to withstand the pressure. No one could say Donald Trump is not a friend of Israel. So I would like us to use more the influence I believe we have that's in our pocket. I would like us to take it out and use it. The Israeli influence here, again, Trump is willing to go his own way at times. Israel increasingly has alienated large elements of the Democratic Party, maybe not the formal leadership, but much of the rank and file, particularly a younger generation. That said, how would I put it? The question of Israeli influence here, yeah, it's there, obviously, through political involvement, money, groups like AIPAC. I get it. My guess is it's probably more influential with the political leadership class than it is with the American people at a grassroots level. And I think it's a real issue. It's one of the reasons I'm critical of what Israel's doing in many cases now in Gaza and the West Bank. I worry that Israel is losing the hearts and minds conversation. I mean, you're a lot younger than I am, but people even younger than you. I worry that by what Israel's doing and how it's doing it, that it's gone from, if you will, being seen by a lot of people. It's no longer seen as David. It's seen more as Goliath, and it's forfeited an awful lot of sympathy there. And I think that's a kind of short-term thinking on the part of Israeli leaders. So I worry about that down the road. But again, Israel, yes, at the moment has considerable influence with what I would call the leadership class in America. But I do worry about its influence over a lot of Americans who see Israel less sympathetically, clearly, than they used to.
Yeah, it would appear that shift has happened considerably. And this is even coming from someone who has never done a true deep dive into the Israel-Palestine conflict. And just as a follow-up in the last question, just to kind of get a good understanding, there's no way for me to not put it in here, especially if we're talking about President Trump and Israel. Now, this is not confirmed by any means yet, but it is the current, let's say, most topical, superficial understanding of the situation and Israel and connections with Donald Trump. He is in a strange situation right now where I, not being in the country right now, can't escape this situation. And I know that this is linked as well to, obviously, potentially to what we do, as people would say. It is potentially linked to how we act on foreign policy, just as you're saying. There's influence on both ways, of course. But how do you see President Trump, and if you'll allow me even one follow-up question, because you wrote a book on democracy, and I think it's important for his citizens to understand, how do you see President Trump finding a way out of this Epstein situation, especially with what it could potentially mean with our relationships with Israel and even other foreign nations?
Okay. I have no idea what, if any, link there is between Israel or Israeli intelligence services, as has been suggested by some, in the whole Epstein saga. I just don't know. I'm not sure anybody, perhaps if there is a link, somebody knows, but I don't know. In terms of the Epstein thing overall, something doesn't add up. I mean, either, all these people who for years were saying there's something there, and clearly there was something there, because we know, all these young women were being trafficked. All these names were showing up in various places, and I'm not blaming or excusing anyone whose name showed up in certain lists, but just because you were on a plane or on an island doesn't mean you were guilty of anything. But clearly there was a lot of smoke, so I assume there was considerable fire. And this was a kind of rallying cry for the MAGA right, that there was somehow a cover-up. And suddenly this administration is now in a position to have access to everything we know. And suddenly they're pushing it aside. It just doesn't add up. So it's hard to, it's either you have to say there was nothing there all these years, or you say there's something there and it's being covered up. It's got to be one of the two. And again, I have my suspicions, but I don't have any, I don't know anything more than anybody else. But I would simply say the fact that you've asked about it, lots of other people are talking about it. I don't think, basically, the administration has failed to put this to rest. People are not comfortable with the explanation that they've been given. So my hunch is we haven't heard the last of this. This isn't going to go away quickly or easily. So it's just hard to imagine there's not more information available that might be, I'll be generous here, politically or whatever, inconvenient for certain individuals. Hard not to imagine that, but I say that first to admit I don't have proof.
Right. I mean, yeah, we don't have proof, and that is part of the problem, which is what we're searching for, and it's a near impossibility. We obviously do know that they know more than what they're saying.
Let me just interrupt for a second. I apologize.
Please.
But if the Democrats, for example, take back the House in the midterm elections, you could, it would not be a reach of a bet to think that they would launch some type of an investigation into this. Again, I don't think this issue is going away.
Yeah, it does not by any means seem to think it's going away. I guess the only thing that I would add, just as out of curiosity, is, do you find the general thesis on Epstein and these things plausible? Does the current idea of Epstein being, as you said, you have no proof, and this is pure speculation in and of itself, but given that you've been around, you're clearly in a better place to judge this than I would be. But is the idea of this plausible? I mean, clearly that there's more, and we do have more, and there's going to be more that's going to come out. But the current thesis of potentially him having intelligence connections, whether he's using blackmail, whether it's laundering, we don't know. We don't have the proof. But what do you see from that?
Two separate things. One is the intelligence thing. I have no idea.
Correct.
So, or to put it another way, if there was blackmail, that he was, what words would we use here? Facilitating interactions between men of a certain age and women or girls of a certain age, that should never have happened. And, shall we say, recording it, whatever word you want to use, and whether it was being used for intelligence purposes or personal questions of money, power, what have you. Again, anything is possible. I would simply say, I don't think we're in a position to rule it out. I'm not in a position to rule it in. Something doesn't add up here. So I would say, look, the old line by Justice Brandeis from the Supreme Court is, sunlight is the best disinfectant. There's something here that doesn't feel right. Doesn't, all of our, your antenna, my antenna, whatever, we react to it. So I would say sunlight. Let's have it looked at. No cover-ups. Let's get it out there. So what I'm hoping is sooner or later, you may never learn all of it, but we may learn most of it. Maybe at the end of the day, there is nothing there, but okay. But then we want to be comfortable with that conclusion. None of us wants that conclusion jammed at us.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that there will be nothing. Like I said, one never knows, but I don't even know that if we put the sun as a disinfectant, as you said, and it showed that there was nothing, that the public at this point would believe it, given the cover-up that has happened over so long. But
you may well be right. It may be at this point that it may have gained so much mileage, perhaps fairly and accurately, that it'd be very hard for the never mind, trust us, there's nothing there, let's move on. It might be, my guess is that would never be entirely successful.
Okay. Dr. Richard Haass, it's been an absolute pleasure. I know that you have written several books, of which we will link down below, and of course to your Substack. Is there any place else other than that we should send anyone?
Well, I can think of all sorts of places to send people. I don't think that's what you mean.
Well, listen, we'll link to everything.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You're generous to to do that? No. I mean, I'd love it if people would take a look at the Substack, watch some of the podcasts we're going to be doing. Look, one thing, my last book, The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens, we're less than a year now from the 250th anniversary of this country, the Declaration of Independence. I would love for more people to spend some time understanding the value of democracy, what it requires of citizens, as well as it gives to them. So many of us now go through schools and never study civics. And one of my personal missions is to get civics back in the schools. But in the meantime, I would love for more people to become informed citizens. So I want them, this last presidential election, more than 80 million eligible voters didn't vote. This is an election decided by less than 2 million popular votes. So, and far fewer electoral votes. So I would love more people to get involved, to get informed. So when they do vote, they're up on some of the issues and some of the differences between the candidates. So I'm hoping in this run up to the 250th, there's a kind of rededication of Americans to democracy and to citizenship. And that's why I wrote that book, and that's why over the next year I will be out there talking about and writing about that issue.
Well, it's a fascinating issue in and of itself, just due to the fact that I believe the populace, and myself included in some ways, became somewhat disillusioned by the state, and the feeling that you don't live in a democracy is going to add to people feeling somewhat dejected, isolated, and powerless in a society where their voice isn't heard. And that's essentially one of the main reasons I got in an argument, one could say, with Don Lemon in New York on the street about the kind of the separations between what the government and the distance the government had from the people, right, and then the media and some of the elites from the people, and that So I think you're right. There does need to be one of a more informed public, which I think is happening now, and I think this is my form of informing myself, having individuals like you. But yeah, it's yet to be seen whether or not we can live in a world where everyone can push to have a true understanding of a republic, and maybe democracy. I know that's another subject, but one that we'll see. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for we're each doing our bit to try to contribute to the quality of the public conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And guys, we'll link to everything, and we'll see you later.